I think it's undeniable at this date that all the things that were presented to us as if they were increases in freedom, they have all turned out to increase the power of the state over people's lives. And I think that's the point. And if you can't see it now, let me ask you this question. Who wants you to say Bruce Jenner is a woman? Who believes that? Okay. If the government can make you say Bruce Jenner is a woman, they can make you say anything.
So, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, it's such a privilege to talk to you. I've come across you several times. In fact, not least your book, The Sexual State, and the very interesting thesis you propose in that book, which hopefully we'll come on to, but also you're founder and president of the Ruth Institute, which, much like ourselves, Coalition for Marriage, has a heart in the US for promoting family and marriage, man-woman marriage, simply not from an ideological perspective, but just because it brings about the best solutions in society and it's good for everyone. And it doesn't mean that other things don't exist. But I wonder, perhaps we could start. Tell us a little bit about what made you form the Ruth Institute. You've got a very active academic background before that. You've written an awful lot. You've spoken an awful lot. So perhaps fill us in on a little bit of your background for some of our viewers and listeners who don't know you.
First of all, Tony, thanks for having me on the show. It's very nice to be acquainted with kindred spirits across the pond,
Hmm.
because as you say, I personally have been involved in the discussions and debates over man-woman marriage since roughly 2008. I've been
Yeah.
involved in that stuff. But the reason I founded the Ruth Institute, it's a quirky story, mix of personal and professional things. My PhD is in economics and I taught economics at the university level for 15 years. And my husband and I, like many professional couples, encountered infertility. And when I thought it was, it's time for tenure, so now I can have a baby finally. And for us, we resolved our infertility by um, applying to adopt a little boy from a Romanian orphanage in 1991. And so when he arrived in our home, he was already 2.5 years old, having spent those first 2.5 years in situation of quite profound neglect. And then 6 months later, I gave birth to a baby girl. So we had, it's kind of a controlled experiment. If you're nerdy, like, an economist would be, it's like, oh, look at this. And my husband's an engineer, so he's even more nerdy. And, neither of us really prepared for what we had to deal with here with these kids, right? But what we saw was that our daughter kind of routinely and automatically developed. And our son, we had to do things specifically and intentionally to help him do what she was able to do automatically. And it just became crystal clear that moms and dads are doing way more than anybody gives them credit for
Mm.
because we don't have to think about it. It's kind of hardwired and automatic. And I really felt strongly that I was being given a window into a process, because it was not deliberate, not what I would have chosen. Nobody would choose to do an experiment like that, of course, obviously. But I felt like I'm seeing something that's really important and that deserves attention. And so I started writing about the family and, and eventually quit my university teaching job, gave up tenure and all of that. All those things that were so important to me just kind of faded away, that were not so important as these two children who were deeply dependent on me personally, that I couldn't outsource that to anyone. It had to be me, that I was really truly irreplaceable. So that's the personal side of it, Tony, that really convicted me, that all this was true. And then the more I started studying it, the more I realized, the traditional Christian teachings about marriage and family are true on every point. On every point, every time you turn around, you're finding something else where the church was right all along, kind of thing. So that's kind of how it happened. I could tell you more about the Ruth Institute per se, but that's what drives my heart. That's what gets me up in the morning.
And that's that. I mean, that's an amazing story, really, and very clearly from an evidence base. And you know this, and our supporters know this, that uh, growing up with your biological married mum and dad statistically brings about very different outcomes to any other relationship type. And I suppose the challenge is finding a way to talk about that without marginalizing single parents or other types of things that go on. We have people, Jennifer, from all faiths and none among our tens of thousands of supporters. And what brings them together is that recognition that actually that's the thing that brings about the best version of the next generation. Other things happen, divorce occurs, abuse, adultery, abandonment. Sometimes single parents, it's unavoidable.
Right,
And we
right.
recognize that. But nevertheless, we need to be able to find a way of navigating through to be able to talk about and highlight what brings about the best outcomes. And perhaps we'll explore some of that, why we can't talk about it, and what we can do to find a way of restoring that truth before we lose even more of it. So with your leave, that's what we'll do for a few minutes now. I wonder if I could start with your book. And you've written lots and lots of stuff, and I would encourage people to go and research you and find out many of the excellent things you've written, many of the wonderful talks on YouTube and other things you've been involved with. But your book, The Sexual State, is quite interesting because it comes up with posits this theory that well, we've separated sex from having babies, and that's done with contraception, etc. We've separated having babies from marriage, and we've also done away with the idea that there's any gender differences in society, and all of that has led to quite a lot of confusion. Firstly, have I summarized the book from your perspective there?
Yes, yes. What you just did there, Tony. Thank you so much for doing that because it tells me you read the book. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, that's so great.
yeah. Well, it's a
That's
good
the way
book.
to an author's heart, is to say, "Oh, I actually read the book."
Yeah,
But you've accurately summarized my definition, really, of the sexual revolution. I think there are all these things that are being bombarded. I think a lot of our people have the sense that we're being bombarded on a daily basis with all this kind of crazy stuff. And it's like it all seems like it's coming out of left field, but it's really coming from three things, three big ideas, and those three big ideas are interlocking. And they have lots and lots of specific spin-offs, but it can be boiled down to those three things which you just mentioned. And so I refer to it as the contraceptive ideology, which is the idea that it's a good thing to separate sex and babies, and that society should do everything possible to separate sex from babies. And that leads, as you noted, to contraception and abortion, and and a whole lot of other things,
yeah,
really. Um,
absolutely.
and then the idea that it's perfectly okay to separate both sex and babies from marriage. Marriage is outdated. I'm sure your people hear this all the time. It's outdated, patriarchal. We don't need it anymore. All those old taboos, yada yada yada. I refer to that whole complex of ideas as the divorce ideology, because what's underneath it is the claim, very seldom made explicit, but now people are being more explicit about it. Kids don't really need their parents. Kids just need somebody to take care of their needs, and the identity of those people doesn't matter. Your biological connections don't matter. That's primitive stuff. That's like superstition, where we don't need that anymore. And so what that really does, if you buy that, what it really does is it gives adults leave to have sex with whoever they want to reorganize their sex lives, their living arrangements, because the kids will be fine. And that is unbelievably destructive. And I don't think it's possible to emphasize enough how destructive that is to
Yeah,
children, for sure. But it's also destructive to men and women because everyone really truly wants reliable love. And we've kind of undermined one of the key things that makes reliable love possible. So I call that the divorce ideology. And obviously it includes unmarried parenthood. It includes third-party reproduction for sure. You go buy sperm and eggs. That's a radical separation of the child from the parent, right? And the things that you mentioned at the beginning, Tony, that when you said things happen, those are unavoidable. A certain number of things are unavoidable. But when people choose by choice, I can remember when this phrase came out, single mothers by choice. that they're making a conscious decision to go buy sperm from a catalog, and that's how they're going to start their family. That's that's something new. I mean, that's a very radical claim. And then finally, the whole issue about the significance of the sex of the body. And I refer to that as the gender ideology, which is basically the claim that the fact that we're male and female is something that is slightly offensive, frankly. I mean, I think a lot of people are offended by male and female, and by the fact that we're different in important ways and stuff, and that we should be past all that, and we should be able to override it in any way we want. And so feminism overwrote sex differences by saying men and women should be the same, equal all the time. And now transgenderism is saying we're going to override it by saying, well, you can change the sex of your body. So it's something insubstantial, and I think that's demonstrably incorrect. And it's making us crazy trying to live by that. So yeah, that's it. That's how I define the sexual revolution, Tony.
So, and there's like 150 things I'd love to pick up in there, but one phrase I've heard you say several times in different words, if you like, is the thing is never the thing, the revolution is the thing.
Oh
Yep.
yeah,
Which is, and I want to pick at that a little bit and find out, because it's almost like, and a lot of people say this, it's almost like there's some kind of conspiracy, an organized destruction. One lawyer put it, in terms of pushing towards a certain outcome of complete sexual liberation, chaos, some people might call it, but. And as much as I kind of think there's no other explanation, I know that to all intents and purposes, governments can't organise and do anything effectively. It's like anything they try and do just gets messed up. But this seems to be happening pretty systematically and pretty well. So it's kind of like, well, is it really organised? Is there anything? I mean, one way of looking at the how do we discover truth again is to look at, well, how did we lose it, maybe? So I'm wondering if you could just spend a few minutes unpacking that. The thing is never the thing, the revolution is the thing.
In the US, people say the issue is never the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is always the revolution.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of commonalities with the sexual revolution and things like Marxism, okay? And there's certainly overlap. There are plenty of Marxists who are sexual revolutionaries, but there are plenty of sexual revolutionaries who aren't Marxists, right? Which suggests that there's something else in addition to whatever else that might be, that there's something else at work. But one of the things that I think the sexual revolution is about is it's a fantasy ideology, okay? If I could just use that term, because that's not in this book, okay? This is me kind of continuing to try to understand what we're dealing with.
Yeah,
because like you, I hate the idea that there's some little cabal sitting at Davos or something and manipulating everybody. Maybe there is. I don't know. But you're not going to hear me say, "Oh, this is it," definitively, because I don't know, right? But I do think, well, as an economist, I can tell you, if everybody has the same incentives and they're all reacting to the same incentives, they'll look like they're acting in concert.
Yeah.
Because they'll all do the same thing, but they need not be colluding or anything like that. It's just, they're all reacting to the same thing,
Yeah.
So I think there's a large element of that. But somebody has made the effort to rejigger the incentives so that people behave in a certain way. I think there's something to that. And the sexual revolution, to my mind, is a fantasy ideology. And what I mean by that is it's a utopian vision of how we wish the world was.
Yeah.
And we love that. We're in love with that idea. It's almost like an idol. It's like an idolatry, We love this idea. And we can't really process evidence to the contrary because that'd be too upsetting. So we put it aside, we suppress the evidence, right? So the short version is that the sexual revolution tells you can do anything you want sexually and nothing bad's going to happen. I think they really think that, and the only problem is us people who are holding out with our old tired Christian beliefs and we just get you
Mm,
guys to sit down and shut
mm,
up, all of this would actually
mm,
finally
mm.
work, you know? And so I think the way that thought has been helpful to me is to see, number one, the people who are promoting this stuff, they really believe that if we got rid of the taboos and everybody did what they wanted, all the problems would go away, it would all be
Mm,
great. Well,
mm.
look, everyone wants to believe that. That
Yeah,
is intrinsically seductive, right?
yeah, yeah,
Right? It would be
yeah,
so great if that was
yeah,
true. You know, we
yeah,
wouldn't have to control ourselves and we wouldn't have
yeah,
to feel guilty. And,
yeah.
and, and that's what you're asking when we say, hey guys, this isn't true, this can't work. That's what we're asking them to give up. That's why we can't talk about it. You know what I mean? Because we're disrupting something that they're really, oh, we love our teddy bear. You know, we we love this thing so much, you know. So
And also, sexual desire is very strong. But what's interesting is when you look at, so that's the natural tendency of cultures, but those cultures don't really last very long. And when you look at the work of people like, what is it, Unwin, J.D. Unwin, 1930s Oxford anthropologist, and he looked at societies. Why do some societies thrive and some societies cease to exist? And the three factors he found, a man-woman monogamous marriage, premarital chastity, and the worship of a deity. And those were the three factors that seemed to be present in cultures while they were thriving. And cultures that didn't have that, or once cultures had lost that, they ceased to exist within 100 years. And although he's dead a long time, according to his map of things, we're about 70 years through that 100 years, which is very interesting.
the only way I would amend what he said is that um, that lifelong monogamy, I think, is the gift of Jesus Christ to the world. Right, because you know, if you really look at it, the
Mm.
idea of one to a customer, literally, really only one to a customer. Are you
Yeah,
sure,
yeah,
Jesus? Because remember, the apostles were flipped
yeah,
out when he said that to them,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're
Who
like,
can marry?
"What?
Who could get married in that case?
Wow, that's too hard," you know. But
Yeah.
but what it did, it created the conditions of radical equality.
Mm.
See, because for every man, one
Yes.
wife,
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
only one wife, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that the possibility and expectation that every man gets married creates a set of motivations and behaviors that harnesses the energy of the man in a constructive way, right? And if you look around, that is one of the big things that we have lost. And it's not just inner city gang thugs kind of loss. It's pervasive through society that men think there's no point to them. Right? And it's very demoralizing to men.
But the thing is, and this is what I think men have lost through whatever cause in society. Actually, the most heroic thing you can do is dedicating your life to defending a woman and a family, and saying, "I will sacrifice everything within me, emotionally, physically, in every way, to defend and preserve my family." And it's just the most rewarding and heroic thing any man can be called to do. And that we seem to have lost a bit of a sense of that in society.
Oh, no question about it. And feminism is gravely culpable in this area.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and I have been asking around, this is kind of funny, but I'm really curious about who allowed feminism to take off, you know.
yeah.
I interviewed a lady called Mallory Millett, whose sister was Kate Millett, and Kate Millett was one of the feminist icons, initiators, and so on. And in fact, Kate was the person who created women's studies programs all across the country in the US. Okay. And women's studies programs are a cancer, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they're permanent grievance centers, you know, turning out graduates who are, you know, at odds with the patriarchy and so on and so forth. Anyway, Mallory, I talked to Mallory for about an hour and a half about her sister. Her sister, Tony, was mentally ill, not just crazy, like with crazy ideas, but I mean, literally mentally ill. And so I asked her, Mallory, who thought it was a good idea to put her on the cover of Time magazine? Who thought it was a good idea for her curriculum and her ideas to be in every university in America? There had to be somebody who was driving that ship, and I don't get it. You know, I still don't have an answer to that.
Well, it's similar with figures like Alfred Kinsey, and so much research in the UN is based on quite a strange character from anyone's perspective. But we've got feminists today, people like Louise Perry in the UK, who I don't know if you've come across her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And in that book, she makes the point quite clearly. Actually, been sold a pup, and the best thing women can do is find a husband and get married and stay married. And and this is one of our leading contemporary feminist writers and speakers.
Yeah, there are a number of women of that generation who are figuring out that there's a problem here, typically they don't go as far as I would go, but that's okay. I'm on to talk about to anybody. I do want to go back to Kinsey though, because Kinsey is somebody we do know something about. We know exactly who financed him, okay? He was financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. To this hour, they have on the Rockefeller Family Foundation, they have on their webpage, oh, we're so proud we financed Alfred Kinsey. Okay? They are unashamed of the fact that they turned this guy loose on society. The fact is, his statistical stuff was garbage. It was not statistically representative. If you want to say, yes, there are people doing these off the wall things, that's fine. But to say, I know definitively that 10% of the population is gay, and I know definitively that 50% of American men are cheating on their wives, or whatever his number were. He had absolutely no basis for that at all because his samples weren't representative. And statisticians knew it and tried to say, tried to investigate and speak out about it and so on and so on. And no, it just kept going along and going along, going. It's crazy. It's crazy that went on. But there's no question who made him a thing. Without the Rockefellers, Tony, I guarantee you nobody would have ever heard of Kinsey.
And of course, I mean, draw the line, if you like, between Kinsey and what's going on being taught in schools today for us.
Kinsey was one of the guys who really thought that there was too much sexual repression, and he wasn't the only one, but he was certainly one. Freud did in a way, but in a way not, because I think Mr. Unwin was a protege of Freud's in some way. I think that's true, because Freud understood the point of social constraints, right? But Kinsey was one of the people who really promoted the idea that sexual repression is the biggest problem, and that taboos are pointless, and that if we would just stop being upset, everything would be fine, including children wouldn't be upset about adults trying to have sex with them. It's just that their parents get upset about it,
And
it's
there
like,
it is.
yeah, that's it. And so the adults who want to believe that that's true are teaching all kinds of things in the school. And they have been for a long time. I know a lot of people are freaked out over the transgender stuff being taught in the schools. But the fact is, sex ed has been there for a long time.
Absolutely right.
That delivery vehicle has been there. The content has gotten more toxic.
Yep.
But we should have resisted the very first minute somebody said strangers are going to talk to your kids about sex.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And even we're going to teach very young children, prepubescent children, about sex, and be quite graphic with them too.
Right. And in a room full of other children and strangers, not with their parents, not inside the family, not inside the home, when the parents judge that the child is ready, right? Because, of course, you do need to have some instruction about the basics of sex, and more importantly, what it means and what its purpose is, okay? And that whole sex ed in the public schools was a delivery system for sexual revolution propaganda. That's really what you have to see it as. It is propaganda for the sexual revolution, because most normal parents don't teach and talk the way it's done in the public schools. And moreover, the very fact that you're doing it in the home versus doing it in the school, that's itself a message, isn't it? And so for a long time, the group of people who promote sex ed in the schools, they have seen parents and parents' outdated values as their opponent. And now that's 100% clear that that's what they think. If you ever had any doubt about it, you can't have any doubt about it anymore. You, mom and dad, you are the problem. And we're here to save your kid from you.
And the thing you can't teach is premarital chastity. You can't even teach really the value of long-term relationships, marriage. Those things are, actually have sex with who you want, when you want. The only thing that's important is consent. much like, if you like, Soviet Russia. The idea that in order for the state to have more control over people and to exert more power and a bigger state, you've got to get rid of families because they don't need big government. And the way you do that is you trivialize sex, you undermine long-term relationships, no-fault divorce, and you confuse genders. Anyone, man or a woman, doesn't make any difference. You're all exactly the same. It's just a social construct.
And that it brings us full circle to what we originally talked about, which was the thesis of my book, The Sexual State. I think it's undeniable at this state that all the things that were presented to us as if they were increases in freedom, they have all turned out to increase the power of the state over people's lives. And I think that's the point. And if you can't see it now, let me ask you this question. Who wants you to say Bruce Jenner is a woman? Who believes that? Okay. If the government can make you say Bruce Jenner is a woman, they can make you say anything. And it's just that blunt now. In a way, transgenderism has happened so quickly and is so radical that I think it's easier for people to see, that this is not a grassroots movement. This is not like a popular uprising that people want boys and girls bathrooms. It's all from the top down. It's all being legislated, and so I would just really invite people to take a step back and go, okay, well, what else has been like this?
And it's interesting because once you redefine marriage, so we would say that marriage is the thing which describes only what a man and a woman can do by definition. And we need something to describe what just a man and a woman can do when they raise their own kids, because it's unique. But once you take gender, sex out of marriage, so anyone can marry anyone, well, you've just undermined the notion of gender per se. And one thing leads to another. And very, very quickly, we find, and I'm sure it's the same in the US. I mean, we had civil partnerships over here before same-sex so-called marriage. And the idea was, well, same-sex attracted couples should have similar rights. It's a whole other discussion, but that was law. And activists said, give us that, we'll shut up. Well, of course, the day after they got that, actually now we want, quotes, equal marriage, unquotes. And I think it was even more obvious in the US.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Every practical problem that they said was a problem could have been solved or already had been solved. Right? And I can tell you that because I was very involved in Proposition 8 in California. I was actually campaign spokeswoman for Prop 8. Because when that issue came up, I had literally just started the Ruth Institute. And I lived in San Diego, and that whole campaign began in San Diego. And I thought the Ruth Institute was going to be about talking to young women about why they should feel okay about getting married and starting families, and their mind wouldn't rot, and they could start a family, sometime before menopause, because that's that's what we're all doing. But when Prop 8 burst on the scene, I really felt that I couldn't sit out on the sidelines and say nothing, because I could see if you redefine marriage, you're going to end up redefining parenthood. And I didn't have it all worked out in my mind exactly how that was going to go. And it's taken, to be honest, Tony, it's taken a long time to work it all out. But what you just said is a very accurate summary, in my opinion, of what the issues are at stake. Put it this way, having children is the most gendered thing we do. And marriage is the institution that attaches parents and children to one another. It's the institution that connects the generations and how the generations relate. If you degender that, you've pretty much degendered society. Everything else is along for the ride.
And not only that, but if you say, so as you said, marriage is the thing which is attaches to parenthood. So if you say, well, actually, same-sex couples, once they're married, have a right to children, well, they can't biologically have them themselves. So what are you saying? You're now saying that somebody else has got to give up a child that they've given birth to for a same-sex couple. And you're heading very quickly towards Marx's idea, which was that you have some women whose job is to have babies for the state. And whether it's, whether they're willing to do that or not is consequential. But you need women, you have babies, the state raises the babies. We'll put them in wraparound childcare. You go straight back out to work as soon as you've had it. The state will bring it up. Don't you need to worry about that? And by the way, you can look after them in the evenings, but we will monitor very closely what you say and
What you're
teach
doing.
them.
Yeah.
If you dare digress, we'll take them away from you.
Right, right. That's where we are. That's where we
That's
are.
where we
And
are.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other twist to it is that it's not just women are having babies and the babies are being taken away. It's that you're giving away your eggs, you're selling your eggs, you're selling your sperm. That's how it's being done. It's been commercialized. And this, America is the most commercialized place on earth, for better or for worse, right? And this is definitely in the for worse category, that we've completely commercialized this aspect. And we've taken the idea of a personal bond between parent and child and completely thrown it in the rubbish. The thing that really bugs me, Tony, is that people won't even ask the right questions. They won't even ask, how are these kids doing? What do they think?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
they think? How do they feel?
Yeah. Well, you'll know about the wonderful Katie Faust and Them Before
Oh,
Us. Yeah. And we've
yes,
spoken to
yes,
her.
yes. We're great pals. We're
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
pals.
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea that actually we should be putting children first and
Right.
shaping our policy around the needs of children, not the wants of adults. And
Absolutely.
absolutely right. You also said on one of the things I listened to, or could have been one of the things I read, right at the beginning. Look, if you're here and you hate gay people or something like that, will you please go? Because this isn't about that. This isn't about that, because actually, liberal democracy, okay, scripture is what scripture is and says what it says, and whether you're an adherent to that or you don't believe the Bible, that's up to you. But in a liberal democracy, adults, maybe within their own confines, without affecting anyone else, go and do what you want. But let's not get the children involved.
Right.
Because actually, and here's a message for would-be communists. What about if every husband had one wife? If every wife had one husband? If every child had a mother and a father?
And a father.
If nobody had premarital sex, then actually we'd all be equal.
That's
And
equal.
really,
That's
the equality
equality.
you want
That's
is
right.
in the faith you're ignoring.
Do you know what, Tony? I love it that you said that, because it occurs to me that, especially in America, maybe in the UK as well, but it's certainly in America, we are so in love with equality. We so hate hierarchy. And what you just
Yep,
did was to say, childhood is the universal human experience.
absolutely. Yep,
Everybody's born a baby. And so if everybody has a mom and a dad, that is a radical form of equality compared with what we have now, where poor children basically have no access to their fathers.
Well, and also, so we have an organisation here, the Marriage Foundation, that produced some stats. They came out with this stat recently that showed 90% of the richest mums are married, only 20% of the poorest mums are married. So all of the social benefits that come with being happily married, the whole kind of two-parent privilege, Melissa Carney's, thing, all of that's gone for the less well off.
Marriage equality. Did they use that language in the UK? Marriage equality. Gay couples have to be treated the same as straight couples. Opposite sex, it has equality. Well, what they did was to introduce a new, more radical form of inequality, because some children have a legally recognized right to know both of their parents, and other children do not. In fact, the state is the instrument that separates them from one of their parents. That is a radical form of inequality. And so this has just become clear to me recently, that equality can never be an absolute value. It always has to be a relative value, because you
Yeah.
have to specify who's equal to whom, and for what, in what context, right? So,
I suppose the thing I'm really interested in, we live in a post-evidence age, right? I mean, I love Brad Wilcox's most recent book, Get Married, all the stats and all the evidence. It's great. Nobody cares.
nobody cared. I know, isn't that terrible?
Nobody cares, right? But it's
Yes.
true. Nobody cares, because we all know that anyway. Yep. And the people
Right.
who, and some people say, I know that, but I don't care. We live in a post-evidence age. There's this massive toxic empathy, which has just abolished justice and common sense.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that phrase before. Toxic empathy?
I love it.
I
It's,
do too.
people
That's
talk about
good.
toxic masculinity, forget that. Toxic empathy is our actual
Hmm.
problem. Just thinking about people's, well, they may have committed a crime, forget that. They want to do this. They feel, what about the feelings? Toxic empathy is absolutely everywhere. So in that context, Jennifer, how do we reclaim the truth? The truth being, right, that men and women are different. That actually the best thing for a man and a woman. And as Brad mentions in his book, the happiest people alive are married couples with children, right? How do we reclaim that truth, and propagate it so more people are happy, so society improves? That doesn't mean other people can't live the lives they want to live, but it means that the benefits to culture, to children, to wider society are felt more. Give me some ideas. Where do we go?
Well, I'll tell you that the point you started with it being a post-evidence age, I remember when that first clicked into my mind, okay, because I suddenly realized at some point that it's a scientifically proven fact that people are not persuaded by scientifically proven facts. And
I don't believe you.
yes. But I mean it is true. It's like 20 to 25% of the population is moved by statistical evidence. Okay. Other people, well, what are they in fact moved by? If you're going to be a factual based, evidence-based person, what does move people? Well, stories move people. Okay. Stories move people. Put a face on the numbers. Put a human story on the numbers, okay? And of course, the person who was the master of that was Jesus, right? Jesus told stories. He didn't produce reports. I've never heard of him producing reports, right? It was always a story that a person could relate to, and make it their own somehow. And what the sexual revolution has done is to create a set of stories, that aren't very human when you really stop and look at it. They have a story about divorce. Divorce is when there are two stories you're allowed to tell. One is two sensible people decide to call it quits, and because of no fault, they don't have to do all this terrible, boring nonsense of proving fault and so on. That's one
Yeah,
story you're allowed to tell.
yeah.
The other story you're allowed to tell is the woman was abused and absolutely had to have a divorce, and no evidence is required. There are millions of stories out there, and they don't all fit that pattern, like most of them don't, right? And so to bring forth the story from the child's perspective, what was it like when your mom and dad married someone else? What was it like for you, when they wanted you to be happy because they had finally found happiness? Because in your heart as a child, what it means is my mom and dad are never going to get back together again. And I've heard that from so many people, Tony. I've heard that so many times. So give them a chance to tell their story. How about this one? If you're gay, the only possible happy life for you is to live as a gay person, embrace gay values, embrace the whole gay political agenda. There is no other possibility for you. Well, that by itself robs people of a certain hope, because there are a lot of people who, and I've only recently learned this by talking to people about their stories, right? And hearing from fellows saying, I have these feelings, and I feel like I can't control these feelings, but I don't want that life. I don't want to have a surrogate. I want to have a wife, and I want to have children, and I want to live. That's what I really want. And some of them achieve it, and there are different paths by which they achieve it. Oh, you never hear their stories. Tony, in my opinion, if we're ever allowed to do honest scientific research on these matters, here's what I think we will find.
Mm.
I think we will find that there are multiple pathways into an LGBT identity, and there are multiple pathways out, which is where I was going with the stories that the sexual revolution tells. They have one story. I think there's lots of stories. I think there are a lot of stories. I've heard a bunch of different stories just from my interviews with formerly same-sex attracted people who are no longer even feeling it, much less living it, people who've changed their lives a lot. For some of them, they were abused, sexually abused. Some of them were psychologically abused. Some of them saw pornography at too early of an age and it disrupted their development. Some of them had troubled relationships with a parent, often the father. There's some kind of father wound that they feel a need to heal. And then as they journey away from the gay identity, let's just talk about the men for a minute. As they journey away from the gay identity, some of them have therapists, some of them don't. Some of them have a deep prayer life, some of them are Protestant, some of them are Catholic. You know, there are different pathways out, as well as different pathways in. I think that's a deeper truth. And I think it's a truth that if we could embrace it, there would be a lot of people who would be more authentically helped than by following this kind of cartoon, cardboard cutout caricature that we have
Mm,
been sold,
mm, mm,
all gay people are this, or there are no ex-gay people, and
mm.
if they're ex-gay, they're lying. Or all of that kind of stuff that doesn't do justice to the whole human
It doesn't at all.
experience.
But I think the future is exciting. I think I'm very much on I don't know if you've read Kimberly L's The Invincible Family. I love that title. I love the thought that actually family is invincible. You're not going to get rid of it because it still takes a man and a woman to make a baby. And there's nothing, the happiest people on earth are married people with children statistically. So, that's still the good thing and it's going to survive. And I suppose between now and whenever that becomes resurgent in terms of dominant belief, we need to minimize the damage, I suppose.
Oh, no kidding, no kidding. And to try to uphold people who are doing the right thing, try to give people hope. Honestly, I think one of the biggest tools of the enemy, and I use the enemy with a small e and with a large e, one of the biggest tools is discouragement. People are discouraged, and that's why they won't speak out.
And that's why, I spend a lot of my time going up and down the country, meeting thousands of our supporters, encouraging them and saying, look, we're the people we've been waiting for. If I can borrow that phrase from somebody else, we're the people we've been waiting for. No one else is coming. The law is on your side. Morality is on your side. The desperation of society is absolutely on your side. Let's all do what we can, where we can, to speak up and support and promote marriage, because really, culture and everything depends upon it.
And so here's what I want to say about that, because I know we're coming to the end of our time. It has occurred to me that because the sexual revolution is so seductive, it's extremely important that people be very clear in their minds that they're against it. Okay. Because if you don't specifically and intentionally resist, you're going to be swept away. At some point, somebody's going to offer you some bait that's going to be just appealing enough that you're going to say, oh, well, let them have it. Oh, well, it's not that big a deal. Well,
Mm, mm,
every single one of these things has
mm.
turned out to be a huge deal, that getting your sexual institutions wrong, sexual disorder is extremely toxic, right? I mean, it ripples through the whole society, and we've been nickeled and dimed to death. We have this expression in the U.S. being nickeled and dimed, that people just take just a little bit here, a little bit there, it'll be fine, don't worry about it, But every single one of these things where we were promised, oh, it's not that big a deal, it's turned out to be a huge deal. So that's the thought I would put into the minds of your followers to be stalwart on it, because it's so easy to be swept away.
Yeah, great. And that's a great way to end. I like that. I love the work you do. I really enjoy listening to you. I'm trying to find an excuse to get you over here. We must find an excuse to work more together because I think you're fantastic and I really appreciate your work. Dr. Jennifer Morse, it's such a privilege to meet you.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.